Hello Summoners and welcome back to another Pro Guides video. My name is Nathan Ng and today we'll be talking about our predictions for the 15 most broken champions on patch 11.18. One of the most important things in a constantly evolving game like League of Legends is to be able to adapt with the meta, and that's why we're here for you. If you know what's going to be OP before the patch hits, then you'll be ready to hit the ground running without having to test and see if that one buff or nerf really made that much of a difference. Hey, if you don't know how to play any of these OP champions or you're just a little bit rusty, this will give you a few days to brush up on them in some normals or on a smurf. Before we get started, I just want to say that this list is not in any particular order. It's just a list of the champions that we think are going to be some of the strongest, most influential picks on this patch. And something to keep in mind is that I do want to say that this patch and the next are very largely targeted at pro play, since Worlds we played on 11.19. Riot has stated that the buffs, nerfs, and adjustments that they're putting out there are being done in a way that they affect the pros, without impacting the rest of us regular Joes and solo queue too much. So despite there being a lot of champions on the list this time around, don't expect the change to be too drastic. Now with all of that being said, our first pick is Camille. Camille has arguably been the best champion in all of Season 11. She has strong laning with very few counters if you really know what you're doing with her. Her scaling is insane and no one can argue against that when she's hitting you for hundreds and hundreds of true damage every few seconds. I mean, she basically has Cho'Gath's ultimate on her Q. She definitely is more prevalent in the higher levels of play, so she did end up on the nerf list, but I don't think that these changes are nearly enough. An extra 4-second window to go in on her may sound great, but she's not a champion that just sits and takes it. She has her hook shot and the slow from her W to deter attackers. A nerf is a nerf, but this one isn't nearly enough to bring her down from our S tier. And speaking of being brought down, you do not want that to happen to you in a game. Whether you're trying to learn to abuse the broken champions on this list or how to deal with them and you end up on the wrong side of the matchup, if you really want to speed up the process of improving, you should check out ProGuides.com. Right now we're giving out free trials to anybody who signs up, so you can really try out all of our services for yourself and decide if you think it's worth it. And that includes access to all of our courses. And to make things even sweeter, when you sign up, you'll even get a free coaching session. I might sign up just because, finally somebody would want to talk to me. All you have to do is click on the link in the description. This free trial is going to last forever, so be sure to sign up now so you can stop spinning your wheels in solo queue and actually get good and start climbing that ladder. Now let's get back to that video, shall we? Our second champion is Draven. I'm actually really happy to see that Riot is attempting to push him into pro play. They're doing it in a way that just doesn't directly increase how much damage that he does all the time, which is good because he already does a ton. I don't want to overgeneralize, but for me, bot lane in pro play seems pretty boring. It's either one dominant carry that the other bot lane can't touch, like Varus, or it's just two hard scaling champions farming it out. But when Draven is in the game, things are usually a lot more exciting. His passive forces both teams to make aggressive plays on both the bot sides of the map, with his team attempting to cash in and the enemy team trying to nip it in the bud and stop the snowball before it even starts. The change that we're seeing this patch is essentially adding an executed Draven's ultimate based on the passive stacks. Later in the game, this may not mean too much, but it has a huge impact early. Most Dravens end up with 150 or 200 stacks in the laning phase, but that's a lot of damage to slap onto an ultimate in the early game. Our next pick is Fiddlesticks. With just about every other meta jungler being hit with at least one nerf in several patches, Fiddlesticks is reaping in the rewards. Less OP early game junglers means that Fiddlesticks isn't just as easy to punish in the early game, which is really his only weak point in the game since he lacks so much gank pressure. With Fiddlesticks' ultimate being as OP as it is, you can pretty much carry any game if your opponents aren't already running wildly away with an early lead. Since he's basically never seen in pro play, I don't expect any nerfs anytime soon, and despite being so good, he's relatively low in the pick and ban rate department, so if I were you, I'd really start abusing this champion. Another jungler returning to this list is Rek'Sai. While I just got done saying that most of the early game champions have been hit with decent nerfs in the past few patches, Rek'Sai is an exception. She's just been flying under Riot's radar, or I guess tunneling under the ground, despite having stunningly good stats in Plat Plus Elo, and an even higher win rate in Diamond Plus, where she's well over 55%. Just like Fiddlesticks, Rek'Sai is just massively benefiting from all the other meta champions being pushed out of the way. When you're the only really strong early game jungler left in the meta, no one can try to match the amount of pressure that you can put on the map. Rek'Sai's tunnels allows her to gank any lane from any angle. When somebody is ganked and killed for just taking 2 steps out of the tower range and getting that last hit, it can be a pretty tilting experience. Pull 6 with ultimate to make dives possible, it gets even worse, and you can even often get a big lead that early on into the game, the target that you're bullying just gives up altogether. Kind of like me when it comes to love. When's my love life getting buffed, you know? Last patch, we talked about how OP Lucian would be as a bot laner with the new changes, and while his win rate may not be anything too crazy, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. For one, there are probably a lot of people trying him out right now, and Lucian does have a bit of a learning curve. There's probably a good amount of Lucian noobs anchoring his stats. Then there's the matter of support synergy. Lucian can technically work with anybody, since an ally's attack triggering this W means that he gets vigilance stacks, but he obviously works best with champions that can easily buff him up and help him trade in the enemy bot lane. My personal favorite is definitely Nami for this, but Yuumi and Sono work really well too. So what this means is that Lucian is definitely an OP pick, at least situationally. If you're good at him and playing him with a high synergy support, especially with a duo, then you should be able to stomp just about any lane. Now for our first support on this list, we have Soraka. While none of her numbers are actually being changed, the ability to remove grievous wounds from an ally before her ultimate goes off is huge. While she may not have the huge AoE ults that make Seraphine and Sona insane teamfighters, Soraka is still one of the craziest scaling supports in the game. You can just sit there and pump heal after heal into a carry, effectively doubling or even tripling their health in a fight. When your ally is affected by grievous wounds, her healing still comes out pretty strong when you have healing power from an item or two. Now, with the ability to remove grievous wounds, even if it's just for a second, you'll be able to ult and W an ally for full effect, which in most cases will put them right back to 100% HP. In other instances, you may make the difference in a fight on the other side of the map. Maybe you have an ally Fiora fighting 1v2 and she ends up being ignited. Your ultimate may turn an otherwise close fight into an easy one. Not only will your ultimate heal more with the changes, but all of Fiora's own healing will be back to normal. Returning to the list as arguably the #1 pick in the bot lane at the moment is Vayne. Incidentally, the hardest matchup for Vayne is Draven, who was already on this list earlier, but if he's banned out, then there really isn't much competition. Vayne can at least go even in most of the other matchups, and if played well, especially with a coordinated duo on Lulu or Nami, odds are you can all-in post 6 and come out on top. The problem with Vayne is that though she is technically a hard-scaling hypercarry, her early game just isn't as weak as it should be. Her ultimate gives her way too much all-in potential, so she comes online a lot faster than she really should. And she's not just a hypercarry with insane DPS. Her kit gives you the tools that you need to duel bruisers, juggernauts, and tanks that would otherwise run over most other ADCs. Another ADC that we have back again is Ashe. She may not have the super flashy 1v9 kit that Vayne does, but she's still an incredibly effective pick for solo queue. She provides an insane amount of utility. Everybody knows her ultimate is a great engage tool, and her slowing autos can be huge for cutting enemy threads, but the most underrated part of her kit is definitely her hawkshot. The ability to scout out where the enemy jungler is and what camps that they have up can be huge, especially if your jungler knows how to use that information. You think that all that utility means that she does a lot less DPS than the other ADCs, but the crazy thing is, you'd be wrong. If you actually build Ashe into a DPS, with items like Kraken Slayer and Hurricane over Shield Bow and Wit's End, her DPS is pretty comparable to hyper carries. The nerf that she's getting this patch does make her first couple of levels a little bit less oppressive, but honestly, it's not going to change too much. She still has more poke than most other bot laners, and once you max out the W, it's the exact same cooldown. Next up we have Thrash. I have to give it to Riot here. I beg on them kinda often for leaving really OP champions completely untouched for weeks and months, but in Thrash's case, they have actually tried pretty hard to nerf him this season. But even with several hits to his numbers, he's still a top tier pick in higher levels of play. The nerf that he's getting on this patch makes his E do a little bit less damage early on, but once you max it out, the AD ratio is still the same. They're also increasing the amount of damage that it gets from souls, so you actually do more damage than before. For me, this is kind of actually a Thrash buff. I actually prefer the old school style of maxing E for more burst damage in lane, so I'd personally be doing better on this champion. The reason that most people max Q instead is for the lower cooldown on the hook, giving them more catch potential. I can see why you definitely do that in pro play over just going for the monkey all-ins, but in solo queue, monkey all-ins can be the way to go. Thrash is definitely one of the most iconic champion picks of all time in pro play. With Worlds coming up, Riot has stated that they really wanted to shake up the pro play meta, but I still think that Thrash is going to remain a top tier pick as a support no matter what they do. And that brings us to today's question of the day. What champions do you think are the most iconic for each role in pro play? Let us know your answers down in the comments below. Speaking of thriving in the monkey gameplay of solo queue, another champion that is going to be remaining at the top of his role is Talon. At this point, everybody should know that Season 11 has been maybe the most OP assassins have ever been. In both mid and jungle, they have totally dominated the meta. But what's been specifically broken are the assassins that can build like a bruiser, combining the most OP qualities of both classes into an unbearable force to deal with. The Gore Drinker build on Talon in theory trades out his burst damage for durability, making him more of an extended team fighting champion. But in practice, he still completely one-shots any squishy champion on the same screen as him, and since he's so beefy, you can't even burst him down if you CC him. He's even able to go a full-on dive into the backline, and thanks to Gore Drinker's heal and Syrinx's shield, he can easily survive long enough to kill the target and then hop on out of there. I just hope that when it comes to this champion, Riot nerfs the bruiser build, but does not nerf the champion himself. Directly piggybacking off of our last entry, we have Kayn. Kayn has been at least okay, if not good, since he got the ability to go between his two forms. The tankier bruiser form of Ross excels at teamfighting other melee champions, especially the tanky ones, while Shadow Assassin allows you to nuke carries, usually one-shotting them with just a quick WQ. But like with Talon, players have been abusing the so-called quote-unquote purple build, taking the Shadow Assassin form but building it like Rost, with a Conqueror Rune Page and a core build of Gore Drinker, Mirror Mana, and Serpent's Fang. Riot did aim some nerfs at him on patch 11.17, but they weren't nearly enough. If they were serious about getting rid of this purple build, then they would just make a Shadow Assassin passive scale with lethality. A champion that I'm super surprised that hasn't been nerfed yet is Riven. She has consistently held onto a high win rate for just about as long as Camille at this point. Riot has given a little slap on the wrist with her E nerf back in 11.13, and as we predicted, it literally did nothing. And for some reason, they just haven't revisited her. The one thing I'll say is it's pretty exciting to see Riven in pro play, so maybe we'll get to see her on the world stage. But I'm tired of her tearing up solo queue games when a one-trick just gets a lead on her, so Riot, please do something about that. But until then, make sure you guys learn her or just play her. And on that note, we have Katarina. Everything I said about Riven sort of applies here. She's a lot of fun to watch, and it'd be great to see her picked at Worlds, but the champion is absolutely broken, and I'm tired of seeing her in solo queue. Actually, I think that Katarina being OP for so long is a lot more inexcusable from Riot than Riven. At least in Riven's case, her pick and ban rate is relatively low when compared to the other top laners. But Katarina has been both the most picked and one of the most banned champions in mid lane, and just in the game period for just pretty much half the season now. A good cat player is just too much to deal with for most solo queue games, and a decent one is still pretty annoying. While some melee champions are pretty easy to punish, at least in the early game, Katarina has insane all-in potential thanks to the damage that she gets from picking up one of her daggers. This usually leads to first blood happening at level 2 or 3, especially if the opponent doesn't really know how ridiculous her early game damage is. And if she can't get rolling in her own lane, Kat's roams are always infamous for how they always end up getting her a kill or two no matter how many times you spam ping it. Gotta love solo queue, right? With her 11.16 buffs, Sono rose up as one of the more popular picks for the first time in a long time. The changes fixed her long-time issue of needing so long to come online. Before, your basic ability haste came from leveling your ultimate, so you had to wait all the way up to level 16 before you had the full bonus. League games nowadays end a lot faster on average than they used to, and with supports generally having the least amount of XP in the game, it's definitely not uncommon to have several games in a row where you never reach level 16. The new passive rewards proactive gameplay by giving you stacks based on actually interacting with champions. It adds a lot of skill expression, even for an enchanter like Sono. Stacking up the passive doesn't just give basic ability cooldown reduction, now when it's fully stacked, every time you get a stack afterwards, it reduces your ultimate's cooldown. This means that you can easily get 2 ultimates off in an extended late game teamfight if you have enough ability haste. Finishing off our list, we have Khazix. We predicted the Yumu's buff would be a really nice indirect buff for the bug, and we were right. A lot of players are still going for Serpent's Fang or the Collector after Duskblade, but going for Yumu's as your second item is incredibly strong, and should be what you do in almost all cases. What makes Khazix so strong is his incredible consistency. Other champions seem to fall a lot more heavily into patterns of feast or famine. Look at Rengar for example. If he's fed, he can definitely be scary, but most of the time when he's behind, he's really behind. And he's just practically useless. But it feels like every Khazix gets fed at one point or another. He doesn't need a snowball in the first 10 minutes of the game. Eventually there's that one bad fight and he just picks up a triple kill. Next thing you know, he's able to one-shot anybody that he finds on his own. His team fighting is also not too bad since he can stealth multiple times in a row thanks to his ultimate and Duskblade's passive. Anyway, that wraps up things for our predictions for the 15 most broken champions on patch 11.18. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to sub so you never miss out on any of our content such as this. Remember, let us know what champions you think are most iconic in pro play down in the comments below. And one last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description as well, where you can go ahead and discuss League further or just hang out and be a part of the community. I can't wait to see you guys back in the next video, but until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.